Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNewsGlobal. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our Tuesday to Thursday weekly show, The Gist, at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Welcoming back from Prague to StratNewsGlobal, Dr. Jeremy Garlick is the director of the Jan Masaryk Centre for International Studies and associate professor of International Relations and China Studies at the Prague University of Economics and Business, and the author of The Impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative from Asia to Europe. I believe, Professor, that is going to come out in paperback soon?
Correct, yes, it's coming out on the 30th of June.
Anyway, Dr. Garlick, welcome back to StratNews. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes, it should be much more affordable paperback. I realized the hardback was very expensive, so 3rd of June.
Yeah, looking forward to that. For those who haven't read your book, which is talking about what happened at the G7. Now, it's quite a mouthful, what it's called. Build Back Better World, B3W, the BRI. Now, the reasoning as a geopolitical and counter development playbook to Xi Jinping's pet project, the BRI, the reasoning we understand, but there is very little detail as to how it will move forward, right?
That's correct. You know, having read the communique that they issued at the end of the G7, in fact, it surprised me that on the 25-page communique, it's only included on page 23, and there's only one kind of long paragraph about it. At the end of the paragraph, it says they are going to assign a task force to work out the details. So, in fact, at the moment, we don't really have any details at all about how it's going to work, except that obviously it's apparently a counter to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. But beyond that, we don't really have any information. And obviously, it's supposed to focus on infrastructure building. So that's the main kind of principle on which it's going to be constructed, which really indicates a reaction to China's Belt and Road Initiative. But I have to say that having the communique, they seem to have been very careful not to mention China much in the communique. There is just one mention of, China's abuse of human rights and the Xinjiang issue in one sentence, but there's very little other mention of China in there. So as far as what happened, we don't have much specific information, and it seems we'll have to wait till the autumn for them to work it out. But I guess that's similar to the Belt and Road Initiative in the early days when it was announced in 2013. There also weren't any details, and the details emerged in 2015. So the Chinese also took a couple of years to work it out. So let's give the Americans time, and I guess it also has to be coordinated with all those different actors, so they have to be on the same page, right? So obviously at this stage, not worked out.
Right. Well, when you're saying the BRI details, I mean, except for scholars like you or Mandarin speakers who manage to get details, even now it's very opaque. But just taking in a comment before we continue this discussion from Pratima Kore, and good evening to Varun Pratap and all our other viewers who are watching this. Biden's B3W, although delayed, is a welcome step in the backdrop of the rapidly expanding footprint of Xi's BRI, better late than never. The idea, though, is to give, I presume, mainly developing countries an alternative which is transparent, which doesn't necessarily push them into the old debt traps that were being talked about, which I know you have an opinion about as well. But what is the purpose? The purpose is clearly to rival the BRI, right?
Yeah, and well, I appreciate what the comment the viewer made about better late than never, because that would be I agree with that completely. No, I mean, I've been wondering for years why they have left it to the Chinese to boost infrastructure. As somebody who has traveled in countries such as Myanmar or Laos or Cambodia, or Mongolia, I've noticed, the infrastructure is obviously very much in need of investment. And that's what the Chinese have been offering, at least on paper. So why has it taken so long for the Americans and the Europeans to wake up to this? So I'm only glad that they are taking some initiative, not just to rival China, but actually to do something that is much needed in the developing world, which is people who haven't traveled there maybe don't realize, but many countries are desperately in need of roads, railways, and ports and other infrastructure to develop their economies. And without those, they can't develop their economies. So if the B3W will be, as you said, I think transparency is an issue with the Chinese initiative. I mean, the lack of transparency, particularly having looked a lot at the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
No arm twisting of sorts as well, I presume.
Presumably not. Yeah, presumably not. They will try to bring all the actors on board, and the G7 countries, the EU was there. I know that India was involved, and Australia and Japan. So presumably they will try to link it. I mean, it's a question also whether they try to link it up with the Blue Dot network as well, and they didn't mention Blue Dot, so that's kind of surprised me they didn't mention it. But maybe it's a sensitive area, or perhaps also it's a question of President Biden wanting to establish his own, signature policy, because the Blue Dot era, the Trump era. So maybe it's his kind of attempt to make a signature policy, which is why he's this new slogan B3W.
Yeah. So one comment / question that comes in from all sides of the force. China has the money to walk its talk. America and its friends have no money. Money talks, empty banter doesn't. Now, when you look at what China does with the BRI, because of its authoritarian system, its state-sponsored capitalism, it can issue orders and get its things done. Here, how I presume the private sector will need to be involved. Now, how do you do that?
That's a very question. I mean, again, the comment is a very, very good one. I mean, clearly also the fact that the US has reacted in this way, has come up with this initiative, clearly demonstrates that their concern about China, and also demonstrates how strong a position China is in, that the US feels the need, or President Biden feels the need, to react in this way and come with something that looks like a counter to the Belt and Road. Now, as for funding, yeah, that's a difficult question. In other parts of the communique, they have referred to, using the IMF and using the World Bank, using the multilateral financial institutions they have available to coordinate the capital. But how do you get the capital into the initiative is another question. There's also obviously another part of the communique talking about this, making sure that multinational corporations are taxed correctly at a reasonable rate of 15%. So I wonder if they might try to bring that into the funding. But at the moment, we don't have any details, so we do have to wait. But certainly, coordination of the funding is going to be an issue.
Another comment from Mataro says that I think the US was instrumental in lowering the cost of a BRI port in Myanmar, CMEC, significantly. So China is really a predatorial via its BRI loans. If you want to take a comment on that, and how do you see how China has reacted to both what's happened at the G7 and the B3W?
Well, China's reaction, I think at the moment, they just, because they've got the same issue that we have, which is a lack of details. I don't see too many reactions. I do notice that they reacted kind of negatively to the whole G7, the sort of implied criticism, although I think G7 were quite careful to not directly criticize China. I guess maybe that's the German influence there. But the Chinese have reacted, to reject any implicit criticism. And apart from that, there hasn't been any specifics in relation to the Belt and Road Initiative so far. I mean, it's interesting to me, really, that the B3W is the most interesting part of this to me, but they buried it down deep in the communique on page 23, and they emphasize a lot of other things ahead of it. So I think in the public discourse, it's lost so far. It hasn't made any impact. It's surprisingly on the White House's page, but there's not much impression from it. I mean, people are not aware of it so far. So I think it's a long way to go, and we'll have to wait until the task force comes back in the autumn with some more information. But certainly funding is a big issue.
Sure. We did discuss this. Pratima Kore was asking, do you agree that since there are so many countries involved in B3W and they're still silent on funding, whether it's by countries or institutions, that it'll be more difficult as compared to the BRI?
Oh, for sure. It's absolutely going to be much more difficult to coordinate because China has those state banks providing most of the financing. You know, the Chinese Exim Bank is providing a lot of the funds, a lot of the loans, and the fund, you know, it's using its own construction companies for building infrastructure. So the funding is going from state banks to Chinese state construction companies, via, you know, the third party, the other country, which then takes on the debt. So that's much easier to coordinate. I mean, China uses its own insurance company, insurance Sinosure, for providing insurance. So all of these are state companies. The China coordinated very easily. They're not having to consult with external actors. They can consult only with they do everything bilaterally. So it's on the basis of one-to-one with each specific country that they can draw up deals. So this is much easier to coordinate. And we see how many problems they are having implementing things in Pakistan or wherever, you know. So some of the things have worked better and some not. So even there have been problems in implementation.
Right, and
B3W, go ahead. Yeah.
Some of the points that you mentioned Germany, so they are, let me try and find that, here you go. While the B3W initiative is a smart step in the wake of current geopolitical scenario, will it be possible to bring democratic countries like Germany on board, given their trade relations with China? You mentioned that, and Ashish Kumar, who has a larger question, EU is not on one page, and it's a challenge for the B3W. What do you think? A quick comment on that, and since you mentioned Pakistan, I just wanted to get your sense of the BRI. How has it really been performing? It is an extremely large project, if I can call it that, but specifically CPEC.
Yeah, okay. So if I start with Europe and Germany, I mean, I'm not so optimistic about that because the EU, you know, as we know, has had difficulty coordinating anything. You know, I mean, there's problems with coordinating anything in the EU today. As regards Germany, I think Germany is very sensitive about its trade relations with China. So I have a feeling, I have a sense that it's the Germans who have sort of dampened down the criticism in the G7 communique about China, so that it's almost not there. So I think, yes, they will be sensitive about that. And the trade relations with China are very important, you know, for example, for their car market. You know, they have a lot of quite a positive trade balance with China. Moving on to the BI and China-Pakistan economic corridor, from what I've been, you know, from what I've been seeing, the evidence I've been looking at, I think the thing we have to notice, and also I've also looked at Iran as well. The thing that I noticed is that the implementation of the project has been much slower than everybody's expected. You know, we see these big announcements. I mean, with Iran, we've seen this repeated announcement of this $400 billion, and yet the evidence shows there is some investment going in, but at a much slower rate than you would imagine. And with Pakistan, the same thing, that Gwadar port, for example, is not being developed.
And it's not pandemic related only.
I think the pandemic has impacted it, but I think there's a trend going from before the pandemic through where it's not, you know, Gwadar port in particular, where everybody's been focused on that and focused on this corridor through to Xinjiang. But if you look at the trade information, I've looked at it, and there's really not much trade going across that border. There's not much, there are not many goods being brought into Gwadar. Really, it's very small compared to Karachi. You know, Karachi is still taking the bulk of the goods. Not many vessels coming into Gwadar, really quite insignificant, and they haven't completed the project of dredging the port or building the infrastructure there yet. So it's moving quite slowly, and I think the Pakistanis are frustrated with the slow pace of it and would like it to speed up. But of course, there's the questions of debt and how do they pay back the money. And I think,
Yeah.
the Chinese, let's say, are not stupid, right? I mean, they're not going to throw their money in there if they think they're not going to get it back, or they think they're just wasting money. So I think they have slowed it down deliberately because they're worried about these debt issues. Yeah. So
Somewhat related question from Starline Warcraft. Despite many claims like debt trap, countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan you were talking about are not convinced, and they are bending more towards China. Why is his or her question?
well, I think in the case of Pakistan, it's quite clear that it's the old question of India-Pakistan rivalry. I mean, both Pakistan and China both feel India to be a rival, and there is border disputes and so on. So for me, I think the geopolitical issues are really influential in this. As regards Sri Lanka, I don't know, because it sort of varies with changes of government, and I think where these problematic, investments come from about 10 or 12 years ago when there was a different president, and it's not the situation in Sri Lanka not totally clear. So I think we need to take the Sri Lanka situation with a bit of salt and just. I think Sri Lanka is probably hedging, trying to find the best deal for itself, and the only deal on the table at one stage was China, and they weren't getting financing from anywhere else. So they went with China, and maybe that's still the case. But, I think they would be happy also to get other sources of finance.
There were other projects which they kind of diverted with trilateral with Japan and India, which created a little bit of problem. My last question, Professor Garlick, is India related. Ashish Kumar actually kind of preempts me. India is more or less silent on the B3W. According to you, what could be the reason? Officially, the ministry has said that the concerned agencies are looking at it, and probably they will be joining. I mean, there's no real indication. But how do you see India playing this since the details are not available? Does India have to get to benefit from this in terms of infrastructure projects within the country, or does India help other third countries in this? We really don't know, right?
We just don't know. I mean, at this stage, there's no details, so we don't know. I mean, I think the reason why India is silent is because they don't have any information, and they're just waiting to see like everybody else. But I would assume, if the principle is to invest in infrastructure in developing countries, then I would guess that India would get some share of it. I mean, that would be a kind of natural part of it. But at the moment, we don't have enough information. I think we have to wait until the autumn, they're saying.
As you're saying, Dr. Jeremy Garlick, extreme pleasure again talking to you. I mean, I could have gone on, but we're getting a lot of feedback from our viewers that we have to keep these discussions a little bit shorter. So that's why I'm ending this here. I'm sorry if I have taken any questions or comments from our viewers as well. But a pleasure again, Professor Garlick.
Pleasure for me too. Thank you for inviting me on, and thanks to all your viewers for participating.
And to those viewers, do subscribe to our YouTube channel, press on the bell icon to get notified or get messages when we put up videos like this one. Do also follow us on social media, on our handles on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. And do support us generously if you can financially to keep going. That link is available in the descriptor. You've been watching The Gist on StratNewsGlobal. I'm Amitabh.